There comes a moment, quiet, almost imperceptible, when the noise of the world becomes unbearable. The chatter of opinions, the endless comparisons, the hollow applause, all of it starts to rot the edges of your soul. You begin to see it clearly that every voice trying to shape you, every judgment trying to define you, has led you further away from who you truly are. And in that terrible clarity, realization dawns. The most sacred act of rebellion is not to speak louder, but to turn inward, to withdraw your energy from the chaos and redirect it toward the only thing that truly matters, yourself. Because in silence, the masks fall away. In silence, you meet the stranger within, the one you've ignored, the one who holds your strength, your purpose, your peace. And once you see that, once you truly see, you'll never waste another breath explaining yourself to a world that never listened. There comes a point in every life when the world's noise becomes too loud to bear, when every word, every opinion, every demand feels like 1,000 invisible hands pulling you apart. You try to keep up, to fit in, to be seen, yet with every effort you drift further from yourself. And one day, in the middle of all that chaos, you realize something unsettling. You have no idea who you are without the noise. You've become an echo of everything around you. In that realization lies your turning point. The moment you begin to withdraw, not out of bitterness, not out of defeat, but out of the sacred need to breathe your own air again. Silence, once feared, becomes a sanctuary. You start to step back from the noise of validation, the endless performance for acceptance, and in that retreat, something extraordinary begins to happen. The voices that used to define you start to fade, and in their absence, another voice begins to rise, your own. At first, it feels unfamiliar, even uncomfortable. You've been trained to live outside yourself, to measure your worth through reflection, through likes, approval, praise. So when you finally stand alone, when the noise dies and it's just you and your thoughts, it feels like standing in a vast empty field. But stay there. Endure the silence, because it is there, in that haunting stillness, that you begin to meet the person who has been waiting beneath all your masks. That silence strips you of illusion. It removes the performances, the borrowed opinions, the need to impress. It forces you to face the rawness of who you are, your fears, your insecurities, your quiet brilliance. It is uncomfortable because truth often is. But this discomfort is not your enemy, it is your guide. Every uneasy moment of solitude is a step closer to the core of your being. The self you find there doesn't crave approval, it craves peace. It doesn't chase after noise, it listens, it observes. It begins to move with clarity instead of confusion. The world will not understand your withdrawal. They will call it isolation, arrogance, indifference. They won't see that your silence is not emptiness, it is power gathering. It is strength maturing beneath the surface. You will learn that you don't have to respond to everything. You don't have to explain your stillness to those who are addicted to noise. You owe no performance to a world that cannot sit quietly with itself, that in silence. You start to notice things you once overlooked, the texture of your own thoughts, the subtle rhythm of your emotions, the quiet wisdom that comes when you no longer rush to fill the void. You begin to silence isn't the absence of sound, it is the presence of awareness. It sharpens your intuition, it refines your perception, and it teaches you the sacred art of restraint, to act only when it aligns with your truth, to speak only when it carries weight. And so you stay silent, not because you have nothing to say, but because you finally realized that not every truth deserves an audience, and not every moment deserves noise. You withdraw not to disappear, but to reappear whole, undivided, and unshakably yourself, because the world's chaos can only distract you for so long. Eventually, every soul must return home to its own quiet center and meet the person it was always meant to become. There comes a moment after the silence when something within you stirs, faint at first, like an ember flickering in the dark. It's the quiet pull of your own attention turning inward, the beginning of mastery. For too long, you've poured your energy into everything outside yourself, the endless chase for recognition, the constant measuring against others, the desperate need to prove that you're enough. But when the noise fades and your awareness turns inward, you begin to see how much of your strength has been wasted trying to control what was never yours to control. Focus, real focus, is not about working harder or pushing louder. It's about reclaiming what belongs to you. It's about drawing back the energy you've scattered into 1,000 directions and channeling it into one yourself. It's a redirection of power, a gathering of your spirit from every place it was carelessly left. And in that gathering, something remarkable begins to happen. You start to see that the world outside you is only a reflection of the world within you. If your mind is scattered, your life will be chaotic. If your mind is calm, your path begins to clear. The moment you turn your focus inward, the game changes. You begin to sense the subtle mechanics of your own being, how thoughts shape emotion, how emotion drives behavior, how every reaction is a mirror of your inner condition. You start to understand that what you thought were external obstacles were often reflections of your internal disarray. You realize that peace, clarity, confidence, they were never lost, only buried beneath layers of noise you kept mistaking for life. This kind of focus is not comfortable. It demands honesty, a rare, ruthless honesty that exposes your habits, your distractions, your fears. It asks you to stop blaming circumstances and start confronting the ways you've betrayed your own potential. But this confrontation is liberation, because once you stop running from yourself, you stop running altogether. You begin to move with purpose instead of panic, with intention instead of impulse. When your focus belongs to you, so does your time. You begin to notice how often the world tries to steal it through comparison, through anxiety, through the subtle seduction of distraction. But now you no longer give it away freely. You become selective with your attention, careful with your energy. You learn to walk away from anything that doesn't feed your growth. You understand that not everything deserves your reaction, and not everyone deserves your presence. As your focus deepens, silence becomes your ally. You start to build an inner stillness that nothing external can disturb. You listen more, not to the world, but to your intuition. You begin to act, not react. Every decision becomes deliberate, every word measured. You discover the quiet confidence of someone who knows where their energy belongs. And when others look at you, calm, unbothered, self-contained, they won't understand. They'll think you've changed. But the truth is, you finally return to yourself, because mastery is not about dominance. It's about alignment. It's the state of being where your thoughts, emotions, and actions move as one. It's the clarity that comes when your focus is no longer scattered across the noise of the world, but anchored in the stillness of your own awareness. And when that happens, you stop chasing, because everything you were searching for begins to rise from within you, quiet and certain, like dawn breaking after a long night. There comes a time, once you've reclaimed your focus, when solitude stops feeling like a punishment and begins to feel like a return. The silence that once felt heavy now feels sacred, a place where you can finally hear the quiet hum of your own existence. In a world that glorifies constant connection, solitude is treated like something to escape from, a void to be filled. But those who dare to sit within it, who dare to be alone without needing distraction, discover that solitude is not loneliness, it is self-reclamation. You begin to realize how rarely people are truly alone with themselves. Even in their solitude, they reach for noise, a screen, a voice, a distraction, anything to avoid the raw encounter with their own being. But when you learn to sit in the quiet, when you resist the urge to fill the stillness, you start to feel something awaken inside you. It's faint at first, like remembering a language you once knew but forgot how to speak. It's the language of your own essence. And as you listen, as you let that silence expand, you start to recognize the patterns of your mind, the rhythms of your heart, the pulse of something eternal within you that was always there, but drowned beneath the noise of others' thought. Solitude teaches you what company never can, the depth of your own presence. It reveals what you've been running from and what you've been yearning for. It shows you that the loneliness you feared was never the absence of people. It was the absence of yourself. And when you return to yourself truly and fully, you stop needing to be validated, understood, or approved. You become whole within your own boundaries. You stop asking the world to mirror your worth because you've seen it reflected clearly in your own silence. In solitude, you also begin to feel the difference between connection and attachment. You understand that love doesn't demand possession, that peace doesn't require company, and that presence doesn't depend on proximity. You realize that most relationships crumble not from lack of affection, but from a lack of self-awareness, from people trying to merge before they've met themselves. Solitude heals that fracture. It restores your inner gravity so that when you do connect, you do so without losing yourself. The deeper you go into solitude, the more you begin to see how much of your life has been built on noise, how much of your identity was shaped by expectation, how much of your desire was inherited from the crowd. And so, piece by piece, you begin to dismantle it. You strip away the borrowed dreams, the false identities, the unnecessary fears. What remains is something raw, something real. You unmasked and unbent by the weight of the world. That solitude gives you back your reflection. Not the polished one you show others, but the unfiltered one that shows your truth. You begin to notice how your mind softens when it's not performing, how your thoughts deepen when they're not interrupted, how your emotions reveal their wisdom when you're not silencing them for the comfort of others. You realize that the most intimate conversation you will ever have is with your own soul dot, and so you stop running from the quiet. You stop mistaking solitude for emptiness. You learn to sit with yourself as if you were your own oldest friend, patient, curious, and kind. Because in that stillness, you don't lose yourself, you recover yourself. You remember what it feels like to belong entirely to your own being, to stand firmly in your own presence, and to finally feel at home within your own silence. The more time you spend in solitude, the clearer it becomes how much of your life has been drained by the weight of other people's opinions. You start to see how often you bent your own truth to fit into the expectations of others, how often you traded your peace for their approval. And when that realization strikes, it cuts deep because you begin to see the quiet tragedy of it all. How much of your potential has been spent trying to be understood by those who were never meant to understand you? Every glance of judgment, every word of criticism, every unspoken comparison, they once carried power over you. They shaped your choices, clouded your instincts, and built invisible cages around your dreams. You gave your energy away piece by piece, trying to explain yourself to people who only saw what they wanted to see. But as you grow in silence, as you return to yourself, you realize that every moment you spend worrying about how others perceive you is a moment stolen from your own becoming. And that is the quiet theft that destroys most lives, not failure, not rejection, but the slow erosion of self through constant justification. When you stop feeding on validation, something shifts inside you. The energy you once spent managing perception starts flowing back into your own growth. You begin to feel lighter, sharper, more alive. You stop living as a reflection of the crowd and start living as an embodiment of your truth. The opinions that once pierced through you now pass like wind through trees. They touch you, but they no longer shake you, because you finally understand that no one can see you clearly from the outside. The world only sees fragments, projections, their own shadows cast upon your light dot, and when that understanding roots itself deeply in you, you stop defending yourself. You no longer explain your silence, your choices, or your path. You realize that explanation is a subtle form of pleading, an unspoken request for acceptance. But when you know yourself, acceptance becomes irrelevant. The only thing that matters is alignment, that what you think, feel, and do are no longer divided. That is where true power lies. There will still be voices trying to pull you back into their noise. They will provoke, question, misunderstand, because your stillness threatens the restless. Your independence unsettles those who rely on approval for identity. But you will not respond. You will not fight for validation. You will not dim your light to comfort their confusion. Because you've learned that the moment you argue for your worth, you've already forgotten it. Instead, you begin to conserve your energy. You move through the world quietly, deliberately. Every step, every action, every word becomes intentional. You realize your attention is currency, and you no longer spend it cheaply. You stop reacting to every distraction, every provocation, every judgment that tries to lure you into noise. You understand now that the world feeds on reaction, and silence starves at dot, and through that silence, your power begins to deepen. You no longer need to prove who you are. Your presence does that for you. You walk through life anchored, untouchable, unshaken by the ever-changing weather of others' opinions. You live not for applause, but for authenticity. And the irony is, when you stop seeking validation, you become magnetic. Because people can feel the strength of someone who no longer needs to be seen, someone who has finally become whole within themselves. There comes a moment after you've detached from the weight of others' opinions when the silence inside you begins to transform. What once felt empty now feels alive, like a still lake that reflects everything with perfect clarity. You begin to sense a quiet force rising within you, a power that doesn't shout or demand but simply is, and you realize something profound. Stillness is not weakness. It is the forge where identity takes shape. In stillness, your chaos starts to settle. All the scattered pieces of who you thought you were, the roles, the expectations, the noise begin to fall away. What remains is pure awareness, untouched by fear or pretense. It's here, in this sacred quiet, that you start to see what you're made of. You begin to feel your strength, not as noise or action, but as presence, the unshakable certainty of someone who no longer needs to prove themselves. Most people fear stillness because it reveals the truth. It shows them where they've been pretending, where they've been hiding, where they've been living out stories that don't belong to them. But if you can endure that exposure, if you can sit with the discomfort of seeing yourself without disguise, something magnificent happens. You begin to forge your identity in the fire of self-awareness. Not the identity others wrote for you, but the one born from your own silence, your own experience, your own truth. Stillness is where your real power gathers. While the world exhausts itself in noise and motion, you build something deeper, control over your emotions, mastery over your impulses, clarity over your direction. You stop reacting to life and start creating it. You realize that rushing is not strength, that loudness is not confidence, and that motion without purpose is just escape. In stillness, your movements become rare but deliberate, your words few but weighted, your choices slower but sure. You begin to notice that stillness changes how you see time. The world teaches you to chase, to move faster, achieve more, keep running. But in stillness, you learn that growth has its own rhythm. It doesn't shout, it doesn't rush. It unfolds quietly, like dawn breaking across the sky. You understand that becoming yourself is not an act of speed, but of patience. You don't force transformation, you allow it. You let the silence shape you slowly, carving away everything false until only what's real remains. And as your stillness deepens, so does your strength. You stop mistaking movement for progress and noise for importance. You begin to see that true power is not the storm, it's the calm that remains after the storm has passed. The kind of calm that can't be broken by circumstance, that doesn't depend on others, that remains steady no matter what the world throws at you. It's the calm of someone who knows who they are and no longer needs to prove a dot. In this quiet strength, life begins to mirror you differently. Opportunities flow toward you, not because you chase them, but because your stillness draws them in. People feel your energy before you speak, the quiet gravity of someone unshaken by chaos. You start to live from a center so deep that nothing external can touch it. And so you stay still, not because you've given up on movement, but because you've learned the secret that all meaningful motion begins from silence. Every action worth taking, every word worth saying, every path worth walking emerges from the steady ground of a mind at peace. Stillness is not the absence of life, it is the space where life gathers its strength before it rises again. As the stillness within you matures, something extraordinary begins to awaken, a kind of awareness that feels both ancient and new. You start to realize that silence was never emptiness, it was depth waiting to be heard. And in that depth, a strange transformation takes place. You begin to hear what others never can. Not through sound, but through presence. Not through words, but through perception. The world moves fast. Everyone talking, everyone shouting, everyone desperate to be seen. But in that noise, no one truly listens. People speak not to communicate, but to fill the air, to avoid the discomfort of their own quiet. Yet you, in your stillness, in your silence, begin to perceive things differently. You start to notice the spaces between words, the truth hidden behind tones, the emotions trembling beneath every conversation. You begin to listen not just with your ears, but with your entire being. This kind of listening changes you. It teaches you that silence has a language of its own, one far more revealing than speech. You hear the unspoken fears behind confidence, the loneliness behind laughter, the uncertainty behind control. You begin to sense what people truly mean, not what they pretend to say. And as you do, you grow more compassionate, yet more detached. You understand that most people's noise is just their pain, trying to make sense of itself. And so, instead of reacting, you observe. Instead of judging, you understand that silence refines your perception. You begin to see the patterns that guide human behavior, the cycles of insecurity, the masks of ego, the endless seeking for validation that keeps people trapped. You see how much energy the world wastes running from itself, trying to drown out the very silence that could heal it. And in that realization, you feel something shift to you, no longer crave to be part of that noise. You would rather listen deeply, quietly, and move with precision instead of panicked. When you learn to hear what others cannot, you stop engaging in empty conversations. You start valuing the pauses, the moments of reflection, the quiet exchanges that reveal more than 1,000 words ever could. You begin to understand that silence is not the absence of dialogue, it's the essence of understanding. In silence, communication becomes clearer, purer, stripped of the ego's need to dominate. You learn that true wisdom rarely speaks loudly, it whispers softly and steadily into the heart that knows how to listen. And as your awareness sharpens, you realize that the same silence that allows you to hear others more deeply also helps you hear yourself more clearly. You start to detect the subtle currents within your own mind, the shifts of thought, the echoes of intuition, the quiet guidance of something deeper than reason. You begin to sense when to act and when to wait, when to speak and when to remain silent. You start moving not from impulse, but from knowing that this kind of inner hearing becomes your compass. While the world drowns itself in noise, you move through it like water, untouched, observant, precise. You speak less, but when you do, your words carry weight because they are born from silence, not from chaos. People will notice the difference, though they won't understand it. They'll feel the calm in your voice, the steadiness in your eyes, the quieter power in your presence. And that is the paradox of silence. The quieter you become, the more loudly your truth speaks. Because silence is not withdrawal, it is mastery of sound. It is the moment when noise no longer rules you, when perception becomes your greatest strength, and when you finally understand that the one who listens, truly listens, always sees more than the one who speaks. And then, after the silence has taught you how to listen, truly listen, something remarkable begins to rise within you. A strength, quiet but unshakable, begins to form in the depths of your being. It's not the kind of strength that roars, it's the kind that endures. You start to understand the final truth of this journey, that the one who conquers himself commands the world, for the world outside you is only a reflection of the world within you. If your mind is restless, life feels chaotic. If your heart is clouded, everything seems uncertain. But when you begin to master yourself, your thoughts, your reactions, your emotions, you realize how much power you actually hold. You no longer fight the world to find peace. You bring peace to the world by mastering your own inner weather. The storms may come, but they can no longer reach you. Self-conquest is not a battle of domination, but of understanding. It is not about suppressing what you feel, but about knowing what drives those feelings, the fears that whisper beneath anger, the wounds that hide beneath pride, the insecurities that masquerade as ambition. When you face these parts of yourself without denial, when you stand in front of your shadow and do not flinch, you begin to gain real authority over your being. You learn that discipline is not restriction, it is freedom. It is the ability to choose your response instead of being ruled by impulse. And that is how power is born, not through control over others, but through mastery of the self. You stop being pulled by the tides of emotion or the expectations of the crowd. You start moving with intention, guided by inner clarity, rather than external noise. You realize that your peace is not something to be found, it's something to be kept. And keeping it requires vigilance, presence, and courage to face yourself honestly every single day. As this mastery grows, your relationship with the world begins to change. You stop reacting to negativity with more negativity. You stop meeting hostility with defense. You respond from awareness, not from ego. You start to notice that the world bends differently before someone who is centered. It softens, it yields, because it senses something unshakable. People who are ruled by their chaos are drawn to those who are ruled by calm. You become a mirror, showing them what peace looks like, though they may not understand how you found it. There is a quiet dignity that comes with mastering yourself. You no longer need to prove your worth because your actions speak it. You no longer need to explain your choices because your stillness justifies them. You no longer seek recognition because your fulfillment comes from within. You realize that freedom was never about having control over everything. It was about no longer being controlled by anything. This is what it means to conquer yourself, to reach a point where the world no longer dictates your mood, your direction, your sense of purpose. You become sovereign in your own mind. You stand unmoved amid chaos, untouched by manipulation, unbroken by failure. You can walk through storms without losing your balance because your center is no longer outside you, it's within you. And once you reach that state, something almost mystical happens. Life itself begins to align with your calm. Situations flow, challenges become teachers, and everything that once felt like resistance now becomes rhythm. Because when you master yourself, you stop fighting the current, you become the current. And the one who becomes the current does not need to control the world. The world begins to move with him. And now you stand here, not as who the world told you to be, but as who you have finally become. You have walked through the noise, through the silence, through the fire of your own becoming, and you have arrived whole, awake, unshakable. You have learned that power is not found in control, but in calm, that greatness is not born in noise, but in stillness, and that the most extraordinary transformation begins the moment you turn inward and decide, enough of chasing shadows, enough of seeking approval, enough of dimming your light for those afraid of its brightness. This is the moment you rise, quietly, steadily, with the kind of power that needs no announcement. From this day forward, let your silence speak your strength. Let your focus carve your path. Let your stillness become your storm. Because the truth is simple. The world does not change when you shout louder. It changes when you become louder in presence, deeper in purpose, and unstoppable in peace. So walk with that fire beneath your calm, that certainty beneath your silence. Build yourself so completely that no chaos can touch you and no doubt can move you. You are no longer waiting for the world to give you power. You are the power. You are no longer seeking the path. You are the path. And now the world will move with you. Good luck on your journey of becoming. May your silence be your strength, your focus your freedom, and your presence your legacy. Thank you.